Hello everyone, Master of None, once again. But then I pick up where I left off on The Hobbit again here, and you can see all my research that I sort of reskimmed this book for this. We'll be picking up where we left off after the Barrels Out of Bond section where they escape from Mirkwood on the barrel raft and such. So the dwarves and Bilbo have escaped the clutches of their wood elf captivity, in wonderful fashion. Are now going downstream to Lake Town, and this will be picking up in chapter 10, A Warm Welcome. At this point, Gandalf's still doing cool Gandalf stuff, still tending to heretofore unnamed business elsewhere. And after leaving the party to venture Mirkwood alone, it's mentioned by the omniscient narrator that Gandalf's now on his route back from whatever he's been doing, but who knows when he'll get back to them, of course. This is a cool quote. A strong water flowed on steadily through the midst, and far away its dark head and a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain. It's also mentioned there are ruins of older, prouder settlements along the shores of the lake, which have sunken and can now be seen during drought or low water periods, which is really cool. Little Atlantis or Sundaland type vibe there. Like, aren't there like some stone ruins off the coast of India that Hancock mentions or something? It's just, cool, like sunken city vibes for sure. Another cool quote, some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings of the mountain, Thor and Thrain of the race of Durin, and of the coming of the dragon, and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang too that Thor and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers through the mountain gates, and all that land would be filled with new song and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. And in the movies, so they're kind of preoccupied with, normal business now at Lake Town. And but some of them are like, is there going to be gold flowing in the rivers again? Some of them have this fancy, and then some of them are gloomy and kind of remember the dragon. But then a lot of people think the dragon's just, myth or whatever at this point. And in the movies at Lake Town, everything's like under this trade embargo vibe, blockade, military police kind of sort of clench, and the master of Lake Town, or kind of the stand-in ruler of Lake Town, is kind of this greedy and suspicious, like even of his own people and stuff. And he's similar to how Denethor was kind of depicted in the Lord of the Rings movies, just kind of sucky a little bit, I suppose. He has this like and the Master of Lake Town even has this insufferable assistant in the movies that kind of reminds you of like Wormtongue or something. It's just awful. Really funny stuff. And the people of the lake have lived under the shadow of the mountain for too long, and they're sort of declined into this defensive posture. And in the books, Thranduil, the Master of Lake Town, even Denethor, Steward of Gondor in Lord of the Rings, are depicted in a much more understandable, graceful light, that they come across as more reasonable a little bit in the books. And in the book, the Lake Town interaction goes much easier, and many are glad for this. Many of the people in the lake are glad for this Return of the King-esque, grandson of Thor reclaiming the mountain and coming in. They're happy about it, and it's just... Many of the Lake Town's people even doubt the dragon still exists, as I had mentioned. The barrel raft... So they're on this raft out of the Wood Elf's captivity. The barrel raft is tied up. Bilbo frees the dwarves from the barrels, and they sort of barge into the Lake Town, and kind of the unwatchful guards, sort of are like, hey, as it had been pretty easygoing on the lake for a while, there hadn't been any real threats for some time. They're kind of homies, with the Wood Elves and doing good business with them, and the dragon's been slumbering, so, what do the guards need to watch out for or whatever? So Thorin introduces himself, and he instantly is given this kind of rite of passage, like, okay, yeah, you go talk to the master or whatever, we'll take you to see him. So they speak with the master, kind of at his feasting table, and Thorin announces himself once again, and there's some elf raftsmen there. They're like, hey, like, you're our prisoners. What's going on here? And the master asks Thorin if this is true, like, were you guys their prisoners and such? And Thorin kind of smartly and boldly invokes sort of this jurisdictional quandary, like, hey, I'm in your lands talking to you now, so what say you about it? And we were wrongfully imprisoned by these wood elves, anywho. And this makes the master hesitant because in his capacity as master of Lake Town, it's kind of large part pragmatic business, and he kind of has close ties to the wood elves, and he doesn't want to anger Thranduil. He wants to stay in his favor and such, and he's heavily under the influence of the trade offered by the wood elves. But soon his hesitation's overcome by this kind of overwhelming, rumbling enthusiasm and fanfare of the lake's people. Like, oh, they're cheering Thorin's return, and so that so as to not fall out of favor with his own popularity base, so to speak, the master of Lake Town yields, and he just offers full support to Thorin's company. And then the wood elves kind of go back and report to Thranduil, like, hey, like, they got away, or like, duh. But so they're once again, luck out, and they're kind of rested and recuperated, resupplied, and ready to head to Dale, kind of this ruined city, like right at the gates of the mountain. They're ready to go try to find the hidden door and try to reclaim the mountain as a whole, their home along with its treasure. Thranduil hears what's transpired, suspects they're attempting burglary of the mountain instead of an outright conquest, because what are they going to do with 13 dwarfs and a hobbit to actually fight a dragon? So Thranduil kind of suspects some sort of sneakery or burglary kind of approach. So Thranduil sends out spies, to kind of watch out for future developments there, because that's like a threat to the whole region, if they wake up the dragon. So amid song and enthusiasm of the lake peoples, Thorin and co. paddle in boats past the lake into the river running and begin towards the mountain. Now we get to like the desolation of Smaug part, kind of, and kind of the tone darkens again as they enter the desolation kind of area where dragons like wrecked everything, and it's like the land's even infertile or something. It's just like all screwed up. And again, you have this Arthurian, like the fall of the kingdom and even the lands in an unhealthy state. It's kind of neat. So they see the ruins of Dale and rubble houses and such, and then they keep carrying on silently, and they see some smoke, kind of suspecting the dragon still lurks, of course. And after several days, they find steps leading up the mountainside from an alley, and they have found the approach to the hidden door, essentially. They go up. Now they're at the right spot, but they can't quite find or access the door. They're like fumbling around, and it's kind of hidden, but they can tell, like, hey, like, we found this path up the mountainside and looks like there'd be a door here, but so they're like, what the heck? So they climb back down to camp to try the next day. And it says they stayed quiet. Cool quote here, no bird or sound except that of the wind and the crannies of stone, danger brooded in every rock. So they're kind of just waiting for some encounter with the dragon, and they can't find this dang door or whatever. So they wait and wait, and in the moonlight one night, a thrush, which is a type of bird, I suppose, starts pecking near the stone wall, and in a final ray of sunlight kind of pierces the clouds, and a small crack opens, and it's the keyhole to the secret door. So that they didn't know was there until like this sunlight ray shined on it, and then a piece breaks off, like, oh, how convenient. But whatever, cool story device there. then they, apply Thor's key, that's an heirloom to Thorin, pretty neat. And, they push and of course the door opens, Another quote here, it seemed as if darkness flowed out like a vapor from the hole in the mountainside. So just really good writing. So now they're kind of at the mountain part, of course, and they send Bilbo their cool, calm, and collected. Actually, not so much at this point because he has to go, encounter a dragon by himself, perhaps. So they send their willing burglar, not into the belly of the beast here. And there's a cool part about him kind of overcoming his mental trepidation in the dark. He's like, well, yeah, okay, I'll try. That's what we're here for. And Balin's kind of nice and kind of decide, like, no one wants to go with him, and Balin kind of goes with him and is a homie, but Balin kind of stays near the door and he's ready to call for help. Like, Bilbo's essentially totally alone in the dark and has to overcome his anxieties to go, like, look for the Arkenstone or something, like look around in the dark and maybe encounter a dragon. So, and it mentions this is kind of like the real battle, like the mental battle, before even undergoing, a potential hazards is very neat there. Little psychological overcoming there. Bilbo prevails over his fear and he creeps along and eventually sees Smaug snoring on a bed of gold and jewels, and they're like crusted into him and stuff. And then after a little bit, Smaug kind of comes awake and he says, "I feel your air." I feel your air. I smell you, or something. Which is just such a creepy thing for like a super predator to say to you when you're alone with it in its lair. Bilbo sort of riddles with Smaug, kind of a little bit of the Gollum thing here, but kind of like to a next level, with riddling with the dragon. And dragons are kind of supposed to be very intelligent and cunning in this universe, but they, so much so that they apparently can't resist riddle talk or something. It's kind of silly, but cool too. So he's totally at the dragon's mercy, so he's got to kind of like smooth talk or something. As happens a lot in this story, they kind of smooth talk their way out of things at key moments, and then even with the dragon. And after an extended jesting back and forth, Bilbo runs and escapes as Smaug shoots fire after him. Bilbo, in the nick of time, and Bilbo's burned a little bit, and then Smaug's, angered and rused, and he kind of flies around looking for the dwarves on the outside of the mountain. So they're in trouble at this point. Even though Bilbo's narrowly escaped, they're still kind of not out of dodge by a long shot. Bilbo had also seen Smaug's prior wound. Smaug had a wound, a scale missing, that Bilbo sees. So that's kind of an opportune observation he makes there. Where the black arrow of Girion had struck its mark, but only taken a scale. It didn't fell the beast. It only gave him a weak spot, which will come in prominently later, of course. And Smaug also sows doubt while they're talking. He sows doubt into Bilbo's heart and mind, kind of about the dwarves' honesty and goodness, and he kind of like crackles away at Bilbo's faith and his own dwarf friends, like, oh, they sent you in here alone, to do their dirty work, or like, are you sure they're even going to pay you, and stuff. So he kind of messes with Bilbo's mind pretty good. So when Bilbo emerges back out from the mountain, he's in a bad mood and is shooken, and he won't even offer much of a tale to the dwarves about kind of what occurred yet. And he even throws a stone at the thrush bird that's kind of watching and listening. And he's like, oh, I don't trust the bird. Like, Bilbo's just kind of wigging out. understandably so, I suppose. Um, and Thorin says, "Hey, leave it alone," and proceeds to mention that the thrushes were an ancient and even used to land in the hands of Thorin's father and grandfather, and would carry messages from Dale to Lake Town. So here we have the kind of Assassin's Creed and like Roman carrier pigeons sending messages idea, which is cool, and of course was actually used in history. I mean, even in World War One, I believe they did this. And I mean, even now, of course, you have bird trainers and all this stuff. And Thorin even says the men of Dale used to have the trick of understanding the thrush's language, which is a very cool allegory, kind of little alchemy, language of the birds going on there. Very interesting reference. And the concept of a sacred mountain and an ancient city communicating via a bird language. I mean, this is pretty obscure reference and kind of neat. Also kind of a little bit of Santa Clausian, sometimes someone's always listening sort of vibe, or almost like a watchful kind of nature. And I even think of owls sort of just kind of spookily watching, it's like nature will be here when we're all dead and gone, and it's watching us during our transit, It's just kind of interesting, like the thrush is watching, and it's just, they used to be able to communicate with them. And of course, Gandalf's communication with creatures features prominently in these stories. So just very interesting little allusion there. And they even mention it's a lost art now, just kind of fun. And again, so you have this kind of living and interactive nature in Tolkien's works, and how Gandalf seems adept at communicating with creatures. Just this ancient Celtic druid sort of lore that kind of Tolkien weaves in here very expertly. Bilbo finally relays to the dwarfs just what he talked with Smaug about. And though Bilbo tried in vain to be kind of riddling and cryptic, Smaug had discerned too much information about that they had come from Lake Town. So now the Lake Town people are in tremendous jeopardy, and they're in danger of Smaug's wrath. And the location of their entrance and camp, and so the dwarves at length yield to Bilbo's fears that we kind of need to get off the mountainside. Like he probably knows like we're here sort of, or he's going to find us soon. And they kind of get in the secret passage, and at much convincing from Bilbo, they even shut the doors, so they kind of lock themselves in there. And soon after they do so, like Smaug like smotes the mountainside and crumbles and cracks and like cave-ins the magic entrance that was once there, and it'll now can never be used again. So it's kind of like good they got out of there just in time or whatever. So now they're in the dark, in Smaug's lair, but Smaug doesn't actually know where they are quite. So now Smaug kind of turns his ire to Lake Town. He's like, and he kind of flies off towards the lake in a rage. So the dwarves are sort of left to their own devices in the treasure hoard for a little while here, but it's dark and they can't see anything yet. They're still kind of don't know if Smaug's coming back. So they're stuck in this dark interior, yada yada. So they continue on, and they send Bilbo first again. Poor Bilbo. But it's kind of fortunate, serendipitous and fortunate for Bilbo that the dwarves are being scaredy cats here, because Bilbo goes a little bit ahead and finds the Arkenstone. So Bilbo seems to just be super lucky with finding things, in this story, But I mean, you kind of got to do that for the protagonist, right? He's got to get a few lucky breaks, especially in a fantasy novel, of course. So they continue on. After much convincing, they finally light some torches, and Bilbo cries out like, "Smaug, darn you, worm!" And then like Bilbo's like, lights, light. Like, he finally convinces the dwarves to just like, hey, we're already in here. Like, we need to just find the exit faster. We need to go and like kind of do some recon here. So they get some lights going and light some torches, and then soon, the dwarves being dwarves, they start seeing all this gold and jewels everywhere, and their greedy incentive, their curiosity overcomes their fears. So so they kind of carry on and start looting the place, sort of, just like looking around. And Thorin gifts Bilbo this really cool mithril coat, which he'll end up giving to Frodo and stuff, and the Fellowship of the Ring. It's very cool. And this mithril is like a kind of chainmail in a way, but it's like extraordinarily lightweight, and but like as hard as dragon scaled. It's like very strong. It's like this, exotic material or something. So like very, very handsome gift there by Thorin. So they carry on through Thor's Great Hall, and after about 2 days or so, like a day and 2 nights, so they're in there quite some time, getting hungry and stuff, and they end up finding the main entrance gate of the mountain, and they finally escape to fresh air and light, and they're like, oh, that's cool. So they're like out of their captivity that they were in there, sort of, that they trapped themselves in there, whatever, in the dark for a while. And they find an out of sight place to rest and regroup, because they don't know when Smaug's coming back and such. So then the story kind of reels back 2 days to when Smaug was initially going to Lake Town. Like, well, what's Smaug been doing in the interim, and how are the lake people faring? And so it kind of reels the story back about 2 days. Smaug's attack on Lake Town, chapter 14, is called Fire and Water. Just cool chapter title. So there's this bard guy who is a descendant of Lord Girion of Dale, the King of Dale, I believe, and he remembers well the dragon still, and he's the first to realize that Smaug's coming, because he's just kind of all doom and gloom and stuff, and that finally pays off, because he notices the dragon's actually coming again first, and he kind of raises alarm, and everyone takes up arms in Lake Town, but to no avail. He's a dragon, so everyone like gears up for nothing, and they're just getting like annihilated for a bit there, and everything's being set on fire. And then Bard kind of they all shoot some arrows at him, nothing's happening, and then Bard takes his last arrow or something, and it's this black arrow that's kind of this heirloom weapon that's been given to him. So a little bit of Excalibur there, even, maybe. It's the black arrow of Girion. And then he shoots, and then it hits Smaug in the weak point, like, perfectly. So he, like, crits Smaug, his weak spot and vulnerability, and he slays the dragon, kind of in the nick of time, as Lake Town's already taken, like, a fourth of its people are killed, and like all of Lake Town's burning and stuff, so it's kind of like in the nick of time. Under great peril, Bard slays Smaug, and it's kind of cool. The arrow's forged at Erebor, so it's like a special arrow, and he uses it at the last moment, of course. And there's a bit of this idea of like intergenerational persistence, like Girion, like, creates the weak spot, and then his son finishes the job, so it's pretty cool. And Lake Town's decimated, as I mentioned. They kind of go to the shore, and but it also mentions, so Lake Town's hit pretty hard, but they still have 3/4 of their population, and the surrounding woods are healthy enough. So basically rebuilding is feasible, but they took a really bad hit, and Lake Town's burned down. So the people are lamenting, of course, and the master had left Lake Town in the lurch and saved himself. He didn't really help with the fighting. He kind of got out of there, and so people are kind of cheering for Bard, and they kind of want Bard to be their new king, and Bard kind of emerges from the shore. He swims to shore victorious, like, I'm Bard, son of Girion, I've slain the dragon, and all this stuff. And the master, being ever concerned with self-preservation, business, and managing others, like protests and demands that Bard can rebuild Dale and be its king, but Lake Esgaroth is his domain, and kind of snittily says anyone that wants to follow Bard can do that, or the master also redirects anger from him to Thorin's company, like oh, who woke the dragon in the first place, like those people did, or we should be pissed at those dwarves and Bilbo. So the people of the lake even say they've had enough. They say something cool. They've had enough of old men and the money counters. So they're kind of like this hero savior of Bard that kind of actually cares about people and is getting things done. But Bard, being noble as he is, says, hey, let's just focus on aiding the wounded and rebuilding for now, and we can figure out who's running the place and stuff later. And he said, but I may follow through on what you said, the master of Lake Town. I may end up rebuilding Dale here in a bit, but for now we'll just get through these next few days, type of deal. Bard also worries now the unprotected, and then it starts to dawn on everyone, and beginning with Bard, that now the riches of the mountain are entirely unguarded and unprotected, and that's going to draw a ton of malintent their way very soon. And Thranduil, via his spies, gets word of these developments, and he begins to ride for the mountain with a host of his wood elves. Even Bjorn hears about it, and the goblins hear tale of these things. So it's like across Middle Earth, almost like just a very wide area. Like people begin to hear whisperings and like, oh, Smaug's been slain. So it's kind of like this clamor across like regions that like, oh, now all these riches are unguarded. So it's kind of this like skittish, like, oh man, like we gotta get there quick and secure all this stuff. So it's kind of setting up for this final scuffle over the now vulnerable mountain, its innumerable wealth, and where's Gandalf still? So Thranduil's army reaches the refugees of Lake Town within about 5 days, and deals are made that the elves begin to aid in construction of a new wooden town on the shore of the lake, even better built than the old one. So they're being real nice about it and helpful. And the rest of Thranduil's host continues to march towards the mountain. And there's mention of crows that circle overhead, almost kind of foreshadowing that war is coming. So that's neat. Again, that presence in nature and watchfulness of mortal affairs. Lots of creature action, always in these stories. So again, with birds, speaking of birds, we return to Bilbo and Thorin's company now. And this 150-year-old raven, Roak, son of the Raven Kark, or whatever. So this 150-year-old raven, Roak, kind of pulls up to Thorin and company and starts talking to him and giving him information and advising him. And he says to Thorin that Smaug is slain, that a band of elves are coming, and that many others of ill intent have heard the riches of the mountain are now unguarded. And he gives them really good counsel. He wise little bird here. He's 150 years old, so he's kind of been around a few blocks there, hadn't he? So he also recommends they don't trust the master of Lake Town, but to trust Bard, who is among them. And Roak finally recommends using a fair portion of their gold to buy allegiance to the elves and lake men. So this is great news overall of the dragon's death, but also enrages Thorin, at the idea of parting, with any of his gold, So before Roak leaves, Thorin begs him to send word to his kin, Dane Ironfoot, in the Iron Hills for aid, because now he knows he's super outgunned, and everyone's coming for the wealth of the mountain. And with this, Roak departs. Now, the dwarves and Bilbo know they're in a time crunch now, so they kind of send Fili and Kili to recover 2 ponies down the valley, and they set about going in, and they begin to build this kind of little square stone brick like wall thing covering the gate. So they kind of build this kind of makeshift little threshold to block people from coming in. But I mean, they're like 13 guys, so they're like gonna be in trouble, The night they finish this makeshift wall, torches kind of appear towards them on the outside, and Thorin shouts, "Who come?" as if for war, So Thorin's already getting kind of defensive and stuff. Something to that effect. And after they see the gates blocked, this war band of elves and the lakemen, they kind of move a short distance away and make camp. They're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a little bit of a deal here. So they make camp, and then the dwarves hear this beautiful music and harps, and then the dwarves begin some music of their own. And this is even slightly reminiscent for me of the kind of the Christmas Eve truce in World War I, where the British and Germans celebrated kind of Christmas Eve together. Though in the larger warfare context, they were of course enemies, but I suppose you zoom out again, and they're all humans, and a lot of them were Christian. So it's like, hey, we'll stop killing each other, for Christmas Eve. So. So kind of a neat little thing there that it kind of makes me think of, like, these people are at odds and they're kind of singing over the walls, and kind of a little bit of this kind of chill vibes for a night. So, cool little night of songs echoing over and back over the little stone wall and the doors have hastily constructed. And so those elves and lakemen don't take our gold, so the vibes aren't that good, I suppose. But now Thorin begins to behave like a kind of cornered rat a little bit, gets a little skittish here. Bard comes in the morning to parley with Thorin, who's of course the rightful ruler of the mountain, the heir. But Bard speaks in true terms and asks for compensation for the struggling of the lake's people, which the dwarves' waking of the dragon directly caused. For Bard, slaying the dragon wants compensation somewhat for, which helps the dwarves. He slayed the dragon, and for some of Girion's wealth from Dale, which the dragon took and put in the mountain. So some of the wealth in the mountain is wealth from Dale that's been plundered. So these are all like very fair requests. Now, of course, Thorin, being a true stubborn, greedy dwarf at this point, it basically says like absolutely not to these like very gracious, fair requests. He's like, no. Thorin's main objection being that the mountain and its hordes are undoubtedly mostly his by birthright, essentially, and they had been on this whole quest, just to lose our gold now, but he's only Bard's only asking for a bit of it, and Thorin's also angered by the army appearing ready for battle at his doorstep, of course, too, and that some of them are elves, the elves that had them in captivity. So Thorin's very displeased by that. But their terms are quite reasonable, though. So, and kind of in his stubborn greed, he's unable to see the fairness of like the subtleties of Bard's request. And he's in this frenzied state after the long quest, being so close. and now the prospect of being besieged, and they're almost like demanding some payment, and it's just a little too much for Thorin's like, gremlin brain right now. So it's interesting to note here too, the lack of Thorin possessing the Arkenstone at this very moment, which Bilbo secretly has and hasn't hardly had the time or the right moment to mention that, hey, I found the Arkenstone. Because they thought the dragon was still going to come back any moment or something this whole time. If Thorin had the Arkenstone in this very moment, would he have been more amenable, to giving Bard some of the share of the treasure? Like, maybe so. Or would it have simply, given Thorin a deeper case of the dragon sickness of greed? Would it have just made him more tweaked out and greedy, of him getting the Arkenstone? It's hard to say, but an interesting idea. Anyways, he declines Bard's request. Bard graciously says he'll give him some time to reconsider. Bard's party returns in a day, and Thorin again refuses and even shoots an arrow at their messenger. And then the messenger informs them that they're now officially under siege. Yeah, they kind of deserved that one. And the messenger even bids them to eat some of their gold, because, go ahead and eat your gold, like what is all the gold in the world going to do if you have no food? So the dwarves are Thorin leading the foreign policy of the dwarves at this point is being quite foolish. The dwarves devote themselves now to they kind of piling and sorting through some of the treasure to distract themselves, and Thorin grumbles about the Arkenstone, that he would avenge any that withheld it from him. And that's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and the cherry on top for Bilbo. He's like, okay, yeah, Thorin's kind of tripping, or like, I need to do something. And he's already not liking Thorin's attitude for a while here anyways. So Bilbo decides he's going to kind of do something crazy here. He's the one keeping a lone watch that later that night. It's Bilbo's turn to watch for like 4 or 5 hours or something on their little wall they've built. And he decides that night he's going to sneak out using the ring and a rope down, and he's going to take the Arkenstone to Bard, like essentially the enemies of Thorin. So to give them a bargaining chip to kind of even out this whole scenario, which is a very, very wise move by Bilbo. But, it's going to put him on the outs with Thorin by a lot. And Bilbo sneaks past elven sentries, with the ring on, and he's finally caught, and they're like, how'd you even get this far past our guards, like, you sneaky little thing. So they take him, and Bilbo's like, hey, like, just let me talk to Thranduil and Bard, and he kind of is very diplomatic and speaks well at this point. And they take him to Thranduil and Bard, and Thranduil's kind of puzzled at the sight of a hobbit, like, wearing a mithril tunic or cloak, like, how'd you get that? Or, like, why are you not in the Shire? Of course, Thranduil never saw Bilbo, I believe, when they had passed through Mirkwood. Bilbo was using employing the ring's invisibility kind of during that whole stint. So I this is like the first time he's even really like seen Bilbo. So he just sees this hobbit pull up that's kind of snuck past half of his guard's entourage, and he's like wearing this mithril tunic. Like, what the heck? Or like, what a strange sight. And Bilbo kind of spills the beans here, gives him the juice. Bilbo informs him Dane's host of dwarves from the Iron Hills is growing near. The ravens had told him that. So Dane's almost joining the party. He's getting close. And then Bilbo pulls out the Arkenstone, and to everyone's astonishment. And even Thranduil, this elf lord, who it says is used to seeing things of beauty. Thranduil's even just tranced on. He's just dazzled by it. And there's this really cool quote about the Arkenstone here. Fairest of all was the great white gem, which the dwarves had found beneath the roots of the mountain, the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone of Thrain. It was like a globe with 1,000 facets. It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon. So this Arkenstone just like makes people tweak out, or it's just like this most brilliant gem you could imagine or something. Think like the Hope Diamond or some, I don't know, jewelry, cool stuff, you know, but it's like this incredible stone and jewel. And Bard accepts it, and he's giving it to Bard. So Bard accepts it, and they kind of both salute Bilbo as he leaves, like, whoa, that was like pretty cool dude, that Bilbo, huh? Yeah. And it was a very, very gracious, wise thing that Bilbo did by taking this to kind of even the odds of this deal that, you know, Thorin's just being a stick in the mud and not allowing diplomacy to occur. So they salute Bilbo, and they kind of advise, like, hey, you should probably stay with us. Thorin's going to be really mad about this, you know. And Bilbo's kind of, you know, having great honor here. He's like, no, I got to return to my friends. We've been all this way, like, you know, at his own peril, I suppose. So he's going back to the people that are about to be mad at him, you know, for doing this. So he's definitely playing both sides here. And Bilbo's leaves, kind of escorted by some of Thranduil's sentries. And on his walk back, escorted, Gandalf suddenly pats Bilbo on the back. He's like, "Hey, good job there. You did great. Like, where have you been?" Or, you know? So, like, hey, you missed the dragon being slain. Or, hey, you're a little late to the party there, Gandalf, bud. Or so Gandalf's returned from his meanderings, you know, no explanation is yet offered of what he's been up to. Bilbo slinks back up the wall to his post he's secretly vacated, and he wakes Bomber at midnight as he agreed, and, you know, the dwarves don't know anything better of it, and Bilbo goes to bed, and he thinks of eggs and bacon or something, as he often does. He, like, dreams of, like, food and being home or something. So the next morning, you know, the wood elves and the lake town's host kind of again pull up to the gate, and they're like, well, you want to make a deal this time, Thor? They're just, you know, but now they of course secretly have the Arkenstone. So there's kind of a cloaked old man bearing a heavy-set wooden chest approaches, and Bard and Thranduil, and this is the first time Thranduil's actually walked up to the gate too. Once again, Thorin refuses any deal. And that forces Bard's and Thranduil's hand, and they reveal the Arkenstone in the chest to Thorin. Like this cloaked guy opens the chest, and Thorin's just stupefied for a long while, and then after a while he's like, how'd you get that? Or and then like, you know, they kind of talk some, and Thorin's like, well, like why should I have to? They want Thorin to give them 1/14 or a good share of the treasure, like, in exchange for the Arkenstone. And Thorin says kind of a good thing here. He's like, why should I have to buy back, like, what's mine? Or, you know, but Thorin also already should have compensated them anyways. But and then after a while he's like, yeah, how did you have this? You know, and then Bilbo just very bravely kind of fesses up. Bilbo reveals it was him that delivered it to them, and kind of I kind of found it and took it as my 1/14 share of the party, like that the dwarves had promised him contractually, you know, like, hey, you're going to get a share of the treasure. Bilbo finds the Arkenstone, you know, so it's not like that unfair, but, you know, he knew that this was the object of Thorin's obsession, you know, and so he probably should have told Thorin about it or something, but, you know, things didn't go perfectly. And Thorin just freaks out and grabs him and shakes him, you know, by the neck, like, oh, I'll dash you against the rocks, I'll throw you off the wall, you know, like, oh, you know, you rat, you know, or something. He just, like, freaks out on him. he's threatening to throw him off the wall, and then the cloaked guy that comes with Thranduil and Bard and has the chest, he throws his hood off, and it's Gandalf, and he's like, stay, stop yourself, and it, and he kind of reasons to Thorin in his Gandalfian way, like to release Bilbo. And Thorin's just super mad. He releases Bilbo, sets him down, but he's super mad. And Thorin tells Bilbo that counts as your share, and so you're not getting anything else. And he says, "May we never meet again." Like he's just furious at Bilbo. So the dwarves are supposed to give 1/14th share of the treasure now to the river folk and elves in exchange for the Arkenstone. That's kind of the little deal they make, and Thorin's super unhappy about it. Thorin even starts scheming in his mind, like, well, if Dane's almost here, like we'll just steal the Arkenstone back anyways by force. We'll just kill all these people, or like Thorin's just kind of like in like a bad state of mind now. So the next day, Dane comes, and he's been informed via the Raven of kind of the Arkenstone dispute, or the issue that that now the Wood Elves and the river, the Lake Town armies, or kind of have possession of the Arkenstone, and Dane is coming to this area to help Thorin. So he's like basically pitted against the elves and men now. So Dane's kind of a little bit determined to repossess the Arkenstone and to help Thorin. So kind of Dane's arrived kind of in the distance there. He's here. And while Bard and Thranduil's forces hesitate at the situation after initial forward runners of Danes, they've kind of messengers of Danes, they've spoken for a second, but they didn't really get anywhere. And so while the men and elves are kind of hesitating, Dane just charges like, well, we're just gonna take you guys out now. And at this moment, Gandalf does Gandalf's stuff again, and kind of Gandalf appears between the opposing armies and before the dwarfs charging, and he kind of thunderously, his voice is like thunder, and he tells them to halt. And Gandalf, ever the diplomat, turns their attention, and it's kind of good timing, I guess, of all, of course. Right then, there's like this gathering darkness from the north, these clouds of bats, like essentially the goblin host has arrived, the real enemy. So this kind of unites them, and Gandalf says, look, like we all need to get together and fight them. So it just always, works out perfectly. Right when it's about to really not work out, and then you get a break or whatever. And then, you got Gandalf kind of helping out, being a little guidance, doing magic stuff, making his voice sound like thunder, like, and freaking the dwarves out and making them listen. He does like magic stuff, of course. And this goblin host is like from Balg, these are the goblins of the north from Mount Gundabad and the far north, and just this nasty area. And they kind of have this army of wolves, and this clouds of bats go ahead of them, and this just entire host of darkness, and they'll soon be upon them. So Gandalf bids Dane to come forth and counsels. There's little time to waste, to turn to this goblin threat. So now the dwarves and the men and elves are all kind of on the same team, and on the similar, at least temporarily on the same team here, against this just terrible goblin threat. So this is kind of the Battle of Five Armies part. I guess the five armies being the goblins, wolves, men, elves, and dwarfs, I suppose. But the goblins have just far superior numbers. So they're kind of, it's like there's three quote unquote armies of the good guys, if you want to make it simple, and then like the wolves and goblins, but there's just a ton of them or something. So they're in a really bad spot. And Thorin his company are still just hanging out in the mountain, and they're just like, they haven't come into the kind of scenario again yet. So the goblins are sweeping south, coming towards them, and the elves take up station on the southern mountain spur, kind of ridge there, and the men and dwarves kind of on the eastern spur, and the sky darkens from the bats overhead. And, Tolkien does great atmospherics. I mean, it's almost like this Warhammer vibes, like the bats are swarming in the sky, like you just feel like you're in hell or something. It's just like terrifying. And maybe they got a few trolls or something, who knows, you know how it is from up north, those goblins, it's and think there's even dragons up north. It's just a nasty, desolate area up north. And then this cool quote, soon they could see the lands before the mountain's feet, black with a hurrying multitude. So the goblins are just swarming, and they're coming. And the goblins have an effective first wave and first attack of like wolf riders, and they overwhelm kind of these few lines of men that are kind of trying to provide some kind of resistance, and they just get like destroyed or something. They just get overwhelmed, and the wolves are howling, and just killing a lot of men and elves, and then the elves and men and dwarves kind of send volleys of arrows, and little counterattack ensues there. The goblins flank around and up the mountain, and they're hurling stones, and the goblins have a really devastating second wave attack, and the cause seems kind of hopeless at this point for the good guys. They're kind of outdone pretty bad here. And then, at the most desperate moment, perhaps, Thorin and company kind of charge out of the gate of Erebor, and Thorin's like, follow me, he does like the Dick Winters, like Band of Brothers, like, follow me, and he does like super badass stuff, or and Thorin like charges at the goblin leader himself, and he's just super ferocious, so Thorin kind of some redemptive bravery and battle prowess, kind of little redeeming Thorin there a little bit. But he's driving straight towards the goblin leader. The goblin numbers advantage still weighs in pretty heavily, and Thorin's position is overextended. And Bilbo and Gandalf are kind of hanging back, waiting for final confrontation. And, what use is Bilbo in a real fight, like this? And he knows it. And then Bilbo sees the eagles kind of coming in the distance, to their aid. And then Bilbo's knocked in his helmet by a rock from up top, the goblins, and Bilbo's knocked out. So kind of don't know what happens, until Bilbo wakes up. And a little side note here, to Tolkien's battles, in his fantasy world, often are preposterous, but they're veiled, in my opinion, by the emphasis of spirit and this happy-go-lucky attitude that perhaps was possessed by warriors of old. And to me it seems typical of like a World War II surviving author like Tolkien, or he was at the Somme, lost friends, to kind of give his characters this charge over the hill, World War I-esque gusto that was asked and required, by warriors of old, World War I soldiers. Going over a hill on command of a whistle to charge machine gun fire, mortars, and gas in the open. I would speculate that would take just this almost silly gusto, that you would even think that you would have a chance against that. So I give Tolkien a pretty big pass there, for some of his seemingly cheesy battle scenes, because it's this medieval fantasy. he's writing with a warm heart. He has very good writing with it. And he came from this World War I perspective. And that conflict was harrowing and ridiculous. Just what was faced on the ground. So you kind of have to have this kind of strange attitude about it or something, just that anything can be overcome. So essentially, Bilbo comes to, he's recovered from a piece of rubble, luckily by a scout, and the battle's over at this point. The scout carries him to this camp where the survivors are. And it appears that the men, elves, and dwarves have come out on top narrowly here. So he gets to this camp, and even Gandalf's kind of banged up. He's got his arm in a sling, and Gandalf's joyed to see him. But then Gandalf becomes kind of somber and solemn, and he's like takes Bilbo into a tent to a dying Thorin Oakenshield. And Thorin apologizes for his kind of last words and tone to Bilbo. And when they last spoke, Thorin says he wishes to die being Bilbo's friend still. He says he goes to the halls of his fathers, kind of Valhalla reference, very cool stuff. Norsey there. Bilbo kneels and bids Thorin, quote, "Farewell, King under the mountain." And Thorin's parting words to Bilbo are this, quote, "There's more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. Farewell." So Bilbo goes and cries for a while, and Thorin dies. And we learned that the battle was indeed won by the aid of the eagles, kind of, and Beorn even comes from afar in bear form and shows up. He bore off Thorin's kind of broken, spear-pierced body to safety, and then returned and killed Bolg, the goblin leader, and the goblins all fled, because once their leader was killed. And we learn here that Thorin's laid to rest deep in the Lonely Mountain, and Bard lays the Arkenstone to rest with Thorin, kind of for good fortune and for his kin to come. And Thranduil even bestows the great elven sword Orcrist in the coffin with Thorin, even though Thranduil had confiscated it, because Thorin died like a hero's death, so they kind of give him back these tremendous items to be buried with. He's earned their respect again. So that's kind of this cool redemption, there. And then Dane becomes king under the mountain, because Thorin's dead. Fili and Kili, we learn, were also killed in the battle, kind of fighting with Thorin. So 10 dwarfs of Thorin's company survived, and they stay with Dane, who distributes the wealth fairly, the treasure of Erebor. Bard gives much to the master of Lake Town, and he even gives the emeralds of his father Girion to Thranduil, who had come to his aid, rebuilding Lake Town. Thranduil was Johnny on the spot, within 5 days with his elves, and was very helpful. So, Bard gives him like the emeralds of his father. Like, that's just really cool and gracious. Bilbo's, of course, given the mithril coat by Thorin earlier, and Dane gives Bilbo like 1 chest of silver and 1 chest of gold, and he wants to give him more, but Bilbo insists that's plenty. And he's also like, well, I got to lug it across Middle Earth back to the Shire, so I can't even like take that much anyways. So it's like this sacrifice, and the spirit of generosity in the region is restored kind of in this beautiful fashion, and they're all cooperating again. So very cool. So now we're kind of on the return journey segment here. Bilbo says farewell to the dwarves, and they're just happy to have their kingdom back and be under Dane, and Dane seems like a decent ruler and guy. He's like less dwarfy, you know. He's like actually distributing the treasure evenly. Like whoa, they can do that. So it's even and it's even mentioned the seasons kind of changing throughout the book. Very thematic, like summer or so at Rivendell. Once they get to Bjorn's and Mirkwood, it's autumn, you know, and it's kind of going towards winter, you know, and winter is always harsher in the mountains, or you know, so they're going toward the Lonely Mountain, you know, it's almost winter, and then after the climax, you know, and for the return journey, spring will be approaching soon. So, you know, and it's always just nice in the spring. So just super thematic. Gandalf and Bilbo and Bjorn and the elves are going north of Mirkwood, kind of along the Grey Mountains for the journey home, and the elves, of course, break off south to return to Mirkwood, and Thranduil says this wonderful thing to Gandalf, quote, "Farewell, O Gandalf, may you ever appear where you are most needed and least expected." And that's just so good, and totally describes like what Gandalf always does in a nutshell. Like he does indeed always appear where he's most needed and least expected. Like that's what he does. So I love that. So they get back to Bjorn's and they stay for Yuletide. It mentions, again, sort of pagan, Germanic, Norse, Druid references galore. Very interesting. So they approach the east side of the Misty Mountains at the Goblin Door and take one last look over Mirkwood, and they see the Lonely Mountain. Gandalf and Bilbo, you know, peer glimpse the Lonely Mountain one final time, so that's cool. Kind of reflecting on their journey, you know. It's sort of implied they make safe passage back through the Misty Mountains because the goblins have sort of scrammed for a while, and they've been suppressed in the region by a lot. They were kind of decimated at the Battle of the Five Armies and kind of retreat up north for the most part. And there's still hazards. They're still beyond the edge of the wild, you know, on the way back. But they kind of got Bjorn chaperoning them for a while, and he's with Gandalf, and you know, it's just, you know, they kind of like, it's way safer than it was. And besides, they're seasoned adventurers now, you know. So now they come back to Rivendell, and they speak to Lord Elrond. And here we learn where Gandalf was during the whole stint, you know, that he was on during the middle of the story. He was attending a council of the White Wizards, said to be masters of lore and good magic, and they had actually exorcised the necromancer that is mentioned in one sentence earlier in the book. So they exorcised this necromancer from southern Mirkwood, and Gandalf mentioned the forest and region should be healthier for it. So again, this Arthurian, you know, like restore the kingdom, restore the king, restore the land kind of vibe. Very neat. It's also mentioned that Gandalf wished they had banished him from the world, not merely from that spot, the necromancer. And then Elrond comments that will probably never happen in this age or for many after. So here we have this theme of an unfully banishable evil or darkness that returns in different places and lurks in hiding to grow strength until he must be temporarily banished again and again and again. So you almost have like Satan or just evil itself there type of vibe or whatever. That's a cool concept. You know, got to make new heroes each generation, I guess, or it'd get boring. That's easy for me to say, who has scarcely faced many hazards. But suspect it's a real glimmer of truth there we're getting from Elrond. You know, Elrond with the red pill always. He who sees through time, because the elves don't die unless they're killed, you know, so they tend to be pretty wise and correct oftentimes. So Gandalf and Bilbo depart Rivendell amid these elvish songs, and when they get back to Rivendell in the first place, it's like the elves are singing like as if they had never left. It's just always chill and like in Rivendell. But they depart, and the elves are singing, and they sing this cool thing: "The river is silver, the shadows are fleeting. Merry is Maytime, and merry our meeting." Um, and they even take a parting shot at Bilbo that his snores would waken a stone dragon. Yet we thank you. it's just uh, it's just kind of loving and jesting. So then Gandalf and Bilbo they cross back over the edge of the wild, or in the troll shaws, and they pass the stone trolls again. Because they're stone, they're not really going anywhere now. They don't have any appointments. They're if they did, they're not going to make them, or they're going to be paying that missed appointment fee. They dig up the troll gold that they had stashed, and Bilbo bids Gandalf take it, because Bilbo already is kind of looted up, supposedly, and so even Gandalf gets paid here. It's better than the Rockford Files, or I suppose. So they return to the Shire, and when they come to Bilbo's abode, Bag End under Hill, there's all this commotion, people going in and out of his home, not wiping their feet, which disturbs Bilbo a bunch. And we're back to ordinary worries that are meaningless. Like, oh no, they're trekking dirt in my house. Well, Bilbo had been gone about a year with no explanation. Well, hobbits kind of don't do that, or so the hobbits of Hobbiton of the Shire have kind of assumed Bilbo wasn't returning, or that he was dead or something. So they're having kind of like an estate sale or auction of all of this stuff. So he gets home from this long quest and journey just to find like people rummaging through his belongings and buying stuff, which is just absolutely hilarious. So he and his relatives, his ever-hated relatives, the Sackville Bagginses, had made off with all his pricey silverware, and much of his furniture had already been sold, so he had to buy it back with his treasure and compensation from his quest. He has to use a good fair portion of it to buy back his furniture that's been recently sold. And so it's just really hilarious. And you even get a little bit of the fairy lore there, like, oh, well, you've done great things on your journey, but, or in this secret realm of Middle Earth, you've done great things, but, you can't receive actual compensation for it. Your compensation is merely the experience you gained from it. So a little bit of this fae, again there, I want to say. And it even mentions the legal dispute of him turning back up alive, like drug on for years, which I just find hilarious. Like, you're back in paperwork world again, or something. So, and he had Bilbo had lost his reputation to most of the Hobbit simpletons, as they now found him a queer fellow, because he's an elf friend and dwarf friend. He had these perceived like unusual visitors, and had went on an adventure, so now he's queer, and they don't get along with him as well. Perhaps these hobbits are too simple. And Bilbo had lost his reputation, a bit, but he gained much more, than it's worth it. And Bilbo kept his magic ring a secret. I suppose Gandalf never knew. This kind of figures prominently in the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. Gandalf doesn't know that Bilbo has found the One Ring. And Bilbo mostly uses this magic ring, it says, to avoid annoying visitors, which is, again, hilarious. Like, he has like one of the most powerful relics in the entire realm, and then he just uses it to like avoid annoying relatives, or like it's something like the people the simpletons that don't understand them, or like, you know, bill collector. I don't know. Like, he just uses it to like avoid people he doesn't want to talk to. So just really funny there. And he takes up writing poetry and visiting the elves on occasion, maybe, you know, making a summer trip to Rivendell, you know, type of thing. Spring break, man, go hang out with Elrond. So he became a Middle Earth rapper, you know, and I'm just kidding. You know, he writes poetry and such. And the last page mentions Gandalf and Balin visiting, and Balin, you know, bringing kind of these great updated tidings and news from the Erebor region that Bard had indeed rebuilt Dale, and that's all going good, and the friendships in the region between elves, dwarves, and men were restored. So just, you know, this great kind of coming full circle, you know, and reconciliation and such. And I'll just read this last little bit here. It's just fabulous. Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo's. Of course, said Gandalf, and why should they not prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar. So they're just kind of back to smoking, you know, again, like where they kind of started the journey. They're just back hanging and smoking, you know, or so again. So anyways, that's The Hobbit. Wonderful book. See y'all later. Have a good one.